Welcome, I'm Tafra. My guest, Fra von Massow, lived in Ethiopia between 1982 and 1986. And based on that lived experience, she wrote White Hyena, a story largely defined by a young boy that she eventually adopted.
So we're in the village with Ashab and his good friend, Mohammed Abdu. And they've been looking after the cattle, but they've decided to go up the river to catch fish, and they've gone too far. And they've always been told to be careful and not go near to the Afar. They get too far. Tall Afar men, their hair hanging in thick ringlets to their shoulders, were standing naked by the springs, washing themselves, laughing and chatting. Their strong bodies glistened in the sun. Women were sitting separately in small groups, talking, washing clothes, preparing food. Ashab had never seen anything like it. His heart pounded loudly in his chest and around his ears. The steady beat of his mother, like the steady beat of his mother pounding grain. A strong, thick smell drifted their way and hung in the air, animal hide, steaming coffee, and the thick ghee in the Afar's hair. Ashab was hot and sweating, nausea rising in his belly. He and Mohammed Abdu sat down slowly and quietly to watch from the safety of the bushes.
And Ashab is basically one of the two top characters in your book,
Yes.
White Hyena.
Yes.
There are also several others.
Yes. So Ashab it's a story it's a true story, and Ashab is one of the main characters. We are with him as a child, and as he grows up. And the other main character is Izzy. She's a young woman who comes to Addis Ababa in 1982.
English woman.
English woman. And her character is based on my experience. So the book is basically very much a true story, which I've fictionalized. So some of the characters, I've kind of mixed up some characters, and some characters in the book don't exist at all. I've just made them up, both in the village and in Izzy's life in Addis Ababa. And the other really important character is Zaudi, who is Ashabir's mom. And she is a village woman. She's a trader. She's a single woman. She was married before, but she's a single woman, very poor. Yeah.
So this is a story set in the 1980s Ethiopia, when famine was at its peak, that it claimed hundreds of thousands of souls.
Yes.
When the war was raging.
Yes.
And the politics was pretty much ugly.
Yes. So the story is based on my son, Badulu, who is Ethiopian. I met him in one of the feeding centers. And
that's in Debre Birhan.
In Debre Birhan.
There was a huge camp.
It was, compared to others, smaller, but it actually housed people. When people were resettled from the north, they used to come through, and sometimes there were 4,000 to 10,000 people at a time.
Some of them were showing up at the gates of Addis Ababa, actually.
Yes, absolutely. So as Badulu grew up, and when I realized what the full story was of Badulu, I said, we have to write this, or you have to write it. He's not a writer, but he started writing the book. And then we talked, and I took it over. And so how I structured the book was to plot the line of weather across the year, and then Badulu's timeline, his story over a period of a few years, my story over a period of a few years, and then all the political events that happened over that time. And one of the crux moments was the 10th anniversary of the revolution, when the famine was really raging and people who were starving were not allowed into Addis Ababa.
So Badulu in real life that you've adopted in this book, a character, Ashab, was born in Ataye, northern Ethiopia. It's in Wollo, right? One of the hard hit.
He actually started in Alamtena, and he went up north to Ataye with his mother, Zaudi, and her mother Hawa. Saudi and Hawa came from the north, and Hawa was very sick and she wanted to die at home. So they went back up to the northern Shoa.
But years later, when he went back, in your novel,
Yeah.
most of the villagers, most of his relatives, the friends of the family, thought he was dead along with his mother.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah, absolutely.
But he survived.
He survived. He survived. His mother died in Debre Berhan. The story, really, there's a big chunk of the story which takes place in the village, where, in effect, although Badulu or Ashabir is not going to school, it's almost like an idyllic life. And then the drought happens, and things go really badly wrong, and Saudi and Ashabir have to move south again. She wants to take him back down to Alamtena again. But unfortunately, the transport is too expensive, and they end up in under a bus stop in Debre Berhan, and she dies there. Yeah. So Ashabir actually was an Arenya 2 or 3 times. In the book, twice is described. Arenya is when a small child has to go and they have to work for a farmer, and they just get some food. Basically, they're looking after the cattle. They're out looking after cattle and sheep, and it's a very, very miserable existence, actually. So one of those experiences is described. A farmer takes Ashabir to Ankobar, and he's there for a while. And in that time, his mother gets very, very poorly, and he's with her when she dies. But she dies in Debre Berhan Hospital.
So is this a story of hope or of frustration or of both?
The story was crafted later on when Badulu was older, and he has an incredible memory. So although I think we started writing in 2005, so it's taken a long time for various reasons. But so hope or frustration, I think.
In other words, Easy came into Badulu's life in real life, but into Ashabir's life,
yeah,
is you. But in the book, Easy came into Ashabir's life at a critical point.
At a critical moment, and he survives. And if we say he went to, Izzy puts him into an orphanage in Debre Zeit. And we could say there's part of it is a story of hope. It's now 40 years ago that I met Badulu, and that this story of Ashabir took place. And I've met each time I meet some of the boys that grew up with Ashabir. And it is amazing what they're doing. And also what Ashabir ends up doing himself, It is a story of hope, it's a story of possibility, but at the same time, I think the story tells very clearly from a child's point of view what it's like to suffer famine and to suffer loss. And I feel quite emotional and strong about it because of all the suffering. We hear in the news all the suffering of children around the world with war and famine, which is created by the adults. We're supposed to look after them. We're supposed to bring them up into a good world and to have opportunities, and we let them down,
When you say we let them down, do you mean the bunch of aid workers? Because you were very also critical about these characters.
Yeah. I think at the time it was extremely difficult. It was very difficult also for the Ethiopian government. People in the Ethiopian government who were trying to get food aid into Ethiopia, who were trying to get the international community to react, were struggling. There was a book, Red Tears, by David Walde Georges, where he describes very clearly, and he leaves Ethiopia in the end, I think because it was one of the Soviet Union satellites, Ethiopia, and the West was not wanting to do something where the Soviets were heavily involved. And it was huge denial, like the time when the first famine in 74.
But aid was here nonetheless.
Aid came eventually, but it was late. Aid came eventually. The RAF came, other aircraft came, dropped food aid into the countryside, and there was a lot of food aid came in, but it was late. And of course, the war didn't help at all.
You were also exploring the interaction between the locals and the Ferengis, the Europeans.
Definitely.
At that time period. Mm-hmm. You were very critical.
Yes, I guess so. I was critical, let's say, on a personal level. And it continues today. All of this is continuing today, where people who are starving and children who are starving are not getting access to the support they need. And the reasons why it reaches that point are still, it's very political. But I was very critical. In the book, Izzy, she's wanting to really get involved in Ethiopia and know Ethiopians. And she doesn't really want to get involved with, there's it's very great what they do, the theatre club and the very kind of expat community. And there's also something around expats. The Ferengi community are expats, whereas people coming into the UK are migrants.
That's interesting terminology, yeah.
It is interesting term. It's very political. We think we're better, by saying we're expatriates. We're not immigrants, which we actually are.
So you basically had your own island, right? Mm-hmm. The embassy and the school.
Yes, but there's obviously people are working within ministries as well, and they have Ethiopian friends. But there's a grasp back to the safety of... and I think, if you go to London, you'll find there's a very strong Ethiopian community. So it's quite normal. One of the areas where I've really been very critical in the book is the way some, at that time, and I hope it's becoming less, that Ferengi men, white guys who are development workers, come into a country, do what they can, what they know. It could be right, it could be wrong. That's a long other discussion. There's books on it. But they also end up in bars and using local women. And I know that there's some really wonderful relationships between Ethiopians and Ferengi, both men and women, and they've married and had wonderful, long relationships and children. But there is a cohort who use local women.
It's like us and them.
No, I think it's a kind of thing where I say, okay, you're here to work for the development of this country. Women who end up in bars selling their bodies, they are at the bottom of the pile, and you're not supposed to use them, right? And that does still happen, and we've had scandals even in Oxfam, which it's an organization that I really love, and I've worked with Oxfam myself, and they funded my work here in Ethiopia, actually. But there have been scandals.
So you didn't like that?
The way men behave in developing countries, it's like, we can do what we like here.
Is it partly because you are a feminist, are you?
When somebody asks me that, I always say, tell me what a feminist is, then I'll tell you if I am one. Yes, I am. I am, yeah. And of course...
That far back in time, as a young lady,
100%, yeah, 100%, absolutely.
It also explores, your book explores the nuances, the cultural nuances, right?
Yes. We can have an example where, for example, one of Izzy's colleagues, she comes into the work one day and nobody's there, but one of her colleagues is there and says, come on, we have to go. There's a lukso, a funeral. One of their colleagues, one of Izzy's colleagues, her brother was executed. And at that time, it still happened. And I reached also to books like Tower in the Sky, Hiwot Tafera. While I was very much aware that there were political prisoners in Ethiopia while I was here working, and I danced in bars, and so Izzy, she comes in, and one of the scenes which I feel, when I read it again recently, it's at the Lucaso, and you really feel it, the way Ethiopians mourn, and the way people let everything out, and she almost, other friends come around her and take her into the house, this woman who's mourning because she is beside herself completely, and she's chanting things about her brother and how he was and what a wonderful man, and he loved Ethiopia. And everybody's sitting around the house having a coffee, and Izzy is with her colleagues, squeezed in between two of her colleagues, and she's just, it's very overwhelming.
It is.
Yeah.
You came to Ethiopia in 1982, and you were working at the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, actually the agency for...
It's called Rehabilitation Agency for Disabled.
Those 4 years of your life in Addis Ababa, in Ethiopia, informed your...
It was a really big decision for me to leave here. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I stayed. I really loved it here, and I had friends from the Street Boys who I still know today.
Really?
Yeah.
They've grown up since 40 years.
And the kids from the orphanage, my friends from Rad, who I still have contact with. I mean, they're some of my closest friends. I have a son, Sebastian, who is Badalu's brother, and they're his aunties, all my old friends from that time.
So that's about the time you adopted Badalu. And 40 years now, he's probably in his 50s?
He will be 50 next year. We think he's born in 75.
I wanted to have him on the show, but...
He's very emotional about it.
And shy, I guess.
I think he just feels extremely emotional. We were very happy just to have a book in our hands. We didn't imagine to come this far. And he really wanted this, and there's some very, very... It was almost like not a therapy. People like him don't have therapy, but telling the story. He would tell me and cry, and I cried, and so for him, we wondered if he would sit on with me when we have the book launch at British Council on Saturday, but he said, I can't. I think he was too emotional.
So why did you write this book? I mean, it was conceived, you said, back in 2005.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, and Badalu's story is an amazing story.
It has to be written and so on. Yeah. But what
then,
triggered?
For me, I've always written, but never books or stories. I come from the generation that writes letters, and my parents kept all my letters from when I was in Ethiopia. And that's I wrote very detailed, so quite a bit comes from that. I love reading, and so, I've been lucky in the last few years. Maza Mengiste came up with amazing books, and Aida Ede Mariam, she wrote about her grandmother, and so, but over time I've read quite a number of African authors, and I was writing, and I joined a creative writing class, which I did evenings, which wonderful woman, Anne Ayler, who had fantastic workshopping your novel. And one of my teachers, she said, you need to put your character in there. And that was very hard, to write my own character. So the whole side, and the thing that Izzy brings is we're able to see more about life in Addis, life amongst very well-educated Ethiopians, the challenges she faces to kind of cope up with them and what she learns, and also the political side of life. It enables us to see what the politics were, and it gets mirrored. You see there's the 10th anniversary of the revolution, and flags go up in Addis and all sorts of decorations. They also go up in Debre Berhan. And the Hungary, they are seeing these flags going up, and they say,
Do I see some catharsis here for you? Having that character easy.
Yeah, maybe.
You through easy.
Maybe, definitely. I mean, writing is a way, anyway, writing is a way of letting loose. And like everybody says, everybody's got a story. Everybody has. It's amazing when you start asking people questions. You think, okay, you have a story there too.
Unlike the authors you just mentioned, you are self-published.
Yeah.
Why?
I wanted it to remain as it was. I had been writing for a long time, and actually COVID is the reason I managed to finish it. My son, Sebastian, is very, very well read and studied literature. He's actually a lawyer now, but he studied literature, and I asked him, read it for me and just tell me, is it okay? He thought it was great. He edited it for me. And one of Badalou's friends, Asagid, who is very well read. He grew up in the orphanage. I said, Asagid, read it for me. Tell me. And they both were very positive, and so I thought, I'll go ahead. If you go to, and in UK, you need an agent. I know that Roman Tuolde was talking to you about this problem of publishing. In UK, you need an agent. They definitely send it to an editor. It takes another year, and then they bring it to you, and you have to start working on it again, And I was finished. So I thought, I'm going to just try this. And actually, Amazon is very controversial in terms of the way it treats its workers and everything. But the self-publishing through Amazon was very easy. It was really good. And I had a great team who helped me with the whole, how it was laid out and all that.
And also checking the facts and so on. This is something that an editor does. And aren't you probably missing an important part in having a book published?
I checked all my facts. I went back Googling. That's another thing which has evolved over the last 20 years. And down to the fact there's a scene in here where there's a football match between Brazil and the Soviets. And it's absolutely true. Brazil won. So,
obviously.
Yeah. So I did check the facts, and then it was good to have Asagid. He corrected a couple of things for me.
So the proceeds from the sale of your book are going to some charitable cause, right?
Yes. I have now identified the cause. The book is dedicated to Saudi.
Who is in real life the mother of?
Real life, and her name was Saudi. And I wanted to give the proceeds from the book. It's, not huge amounts, but proceeds from the book will go to a charity that works with extremely poor women in rural areas. And I've met Almaz Abraham, and she has a charity that's called Mazgana Child and Family Development Association. She works with extremely poor women in the countryside. And she also has an amazing program that she's to get sponsorship, people who can give a small amount of money, and she and her small team, mostly volunteers, give that money and support extremely poor women living in Addis Ababa.
Interesting. Some of the powerful characters in the book are women, so
yes,
that's what that goes into that cause.
Yes.
How is it reviewed this far?
Most of the reviews are on Amazon. The book is sold in UK, Europe, USA. It's sold through Amazon. And I've had 5 out of 5 all the way through. But there's I didn't look recently, but about 25 reviews. And everybody so far, I haven't heard from the people who didn't enjoy it.
Oh, really?
No.
Well, this is close to 600 pages, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and people say that once they start reading it, they can't stop. They can't put it down. One of my first readers was my husband, who I met here in Ethiopia. And he doesn't read many novels because he's so busy with other stuff, but he read almost all night. He was, of course, if people were here at that time,
Another paragraph that you want to read for me?
Okay, this is a short passage from Piazza, where I used to live in the building where British Council library was.
Okay.
I lived in that building, and so that's all gone now, I think, most of Piazza. So this is from Izzy's point of view. When people start reading, they'll just get into Ashabir and Izzy and Zaudi. They can forget about everything else. A tree had squeezed its way between the Blue Nile Bar and Addis Sports next door, spreading shade over the inner courtyard and cracks through the walls. The pale blue paintwork was peeling under the ivy, exposing crumbling mud brickwork. A short flight of steps took her up to the entrance. The bar was empty. Later in the day it would pick up. Agucho stayed open until an hour or so before curfew, and most evenings she could hear the faint rhythms of Tilahun, Asta Bekele, or Bob Marley floating up through the open window of their flat. The dark interior was a stark contrast to the bright morning outside. A boy was sloshing water from a bucket onto the floor with a mop, leaving odd-shaped patches of damp in the concrete. There was a pungent smell of stale beer and Dettol. In the evenings, the place was more inviting, with its warm bodies, cigarette smoke and cheap perfume. The tables and chairs were the uniform hollow aluminium and grated against the floor as the boy moved them around.
Quite a description of an interesting scene.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure having you on my show.
Thank you very much, Tafera.